Hello and welcome to another edition of the Daily Objective. Today we're going to be talking about a case that probably everyone in the Western world has heard of, the currently pending Supreme Court case on abortion rights that comes from a Mississippi statute that's being challenged. Arguments were heard last week in front of the Supreme Court, arguing both for and against a law that in effect made all abortions after 15 weeks unlawful in Mississippi. And that could have the effect of overturning a now almost 50-year-old precedent of Roe versus Wade, protecting the very important right of a woman to have an abortion. And given the new configuration of the Supreme Court, President Trump's recent appointments, the overturning of Roe versus Wade is now a very serious possibility that we have to consider. And I'm fortunate to have with me, of course, as so often is familiar to this audience, Mark Pellegrino. And we all are also privileged to be joined with that most outstanding of communicators, also familiar with this audience, Mr. Don Watkins. So welcome, gentlemen.
Good to see you, James.
You know, we are on the verge, I think, or at least we're getting very close to it, of at least a major step back in the Supreme Court's protection, which has been reasonably consistent. In famous 1972 case, Roe versus Wade, had broken it up into trimesters of the 9 months of pregnancy. The first trimester, a woman had an absolute right. The state has a right to regulate for a woman's health during the second, and the fetus's right only kicks in the third trimester, using the basic idea of viability, but with a strict trimester rule. In the 1992 case, the famous Casey case before the Supreme Court, they stepped back, and instead of it being a fundamental right that had to face strict scrutiny, it's now an undue burden on abortion test, and viability is the test, which can now be, as early as, 15, 16 weeks of pregnancy. And so it is at that point that Mississippi says, let's make it 15 weeks and see where the Supreme Court goes with that. There is currently also pending a Texas law that's being challenged in the Supreme Court, which makes it in effect, could be as low as 6 weeks because it connects it to fetal heartbeat. Both of these laws, in my view, are offensive to in my view, a woman has a right to evict anyone from her body at any moment, and that a human being doesn't really get legal rights until they get separated from the woman. Now, I'm not saying there aren't borderline cases, in the 9th month and stuff, but to me, the rights issue is a pretty straightforward one. But the Supreme Court, I think, is on the verge right now of changing the law. And I just wonder how you guys react to that. I mean, two of the smartest guys I know. So what do you think, Don?
Well, I think, if we step back, and there's kind of three issues that have to be separated. So one is the legal issues, and, we can talk about kind of the legal foundation of Roe versus Wade. Then there's the political issue. We could put it the rights issue, which is what should the right government policy be? And then there's a moral issue, which is there may be cases where abortion, in our judgment, should be legal, but that we would regard it as immoral. And, if abortion was made illegal, I think we would be saying that there's plenty of moral cases of abortion that were being banned. And so I think the core issue to get clear on is the political issue. And as you suggested, James, the fact is that what rights are supposed to do are govern the ability of individuals to live their lives in a society, which means that we have to be able to deal with one another voluntarily. And if we can't reach a voluntary agreement, go our separate ways. And so that presupposes as a fundamental fact that you can go your separate ways, that there's distinct individuals. And what anti-abortion laws do is they basically give something that's within and dependent on a woman rights that supersede her ability to pursue her happiness. And so that's kind of the fundamental flaw or the fundamental problem in anybody claiming the so-called right of the unborn. And as you say, there's borderline cases in the sense of I'm much more sympathetic to somebody who says, look, the last trimester, or the last month of the last trimester, what are we going to do about that? But what I have no sympathy with, and certainly Ayn Rand had no sympathy with, is if you're talking in the early stages of a pregnancy, definitely in the first 15 weeks at minimum, but probably up till 24 weeks or so, the idea that something that is perceptually not anything like a human being, that this has rights and that the woman's going to be sacrificed to those alleged rights, I think is really barbaric, really monstrous. And anybody who claims to be pro-life and is going to eviscerate the rights of women in that way, I think has no right to the claim of that title.
Right.
Let me ask you a question, James. Is the Supreme Court now focusing on the right things? It doesn't seem like the argument has been focused on the right things in the past, and now they seem to be focused, if I understand the arguments correctly, on whether they should follow precedent, whether the Supreme Court has the jurisdiction to interfere with state law or not. This seems to all be a distraction from the fundamental core ideas that you guys are talking about. What rights are when they begin for a human being, what their purpose are in society.
Yeah, the Supreme Court's all off on the wrong track, and the concepts they're using are not the concepts that are meaningful. Don did a far better job of locating the relevant moral and legal concepts at play here than the Supreme Court certainly has. But that is endemic to the Supreme Court. You know, after the Civil War, the 14th Amendment to the Constitution was passed, and the intent of the 14th Amendment was to impose all of the limitations on the federal government, and it recognized all of the rights that were protected in the Bill of Rights, protecting us from the federal government against the states. But the Supreme Court quickly, you know, back in the 130 years ago, 140 years ago, quickly got rid of that and said, no. States can go their own way and do their own things. And it's only been through sort of legal technicalities, overusing the Due Process Clause, and this is technical legal stuff, that they have slowly reintroduced the idea of the Bill of Rights being enforced against the states. Through most of the 20th century, freedom of speech, freedom of religion, all that got imposed against the states, so the states can't impose censorship or establish religion, that sort of thing. In the case of, for example, the birth control and abortion decisions, a very interesting thing happened. The Supreme Court used the Ninth Amendment, at least one of the justices in the birth control decision in the Griswold case used the Ninth Amendment of unenumerated rights to find this right to privacy, a fundamental right which really does underlie and undergird the big ideas behind the Bill of Rights. But as I say, the Supreme Court shies away from reading those big, bold statements about individual liberty in their proper context. And Tom Bowden recently had a really great post. What's at risk and at stake here with Roe versus Wade is whether the Supreme Court will continue to recognize a broad concept of liberty that includes specifically unenumerated rights if they are fundamental to individual liberty. I think that's what's at stake. The Supreme Court is looking at this all wrong. Instead of looking at the concepts like Don was, does this being have independent existence, or is it dependent on this woman? What is the status of a fetus inside of a woman as such? And then what are the woman's rights? I mean, to talk about consequences, I mean, the going back to a world, and we have the political context today is absolutely frightening. We have over a dozen states that have anti-abortion trigger laws, and there are several more states that have abortion laws just passed, waiting to see if they'll be validated by the Supreme Court overturning Roe versus Wade. Half the states in the Union could have laws against abortion should the United States Supreme Court overturn Roe. So it's very, very important what they're doing here. But in no case, and I think there are it's hard to predict some of these justices. Roberts has tried to indicate, I think, a compromise through his questions that I could detect during the arguments. I'm not sure where Alito and Gorsuch may fall out. They may be willing to compromise in some way, but there's a solid, you got new Amy Coney Barrett, and you've got Kavanaugh, and you've got Clarence Thomas, and they're going to be solidly against Roe. The liberals will join in a concurrence if they can, if there's some compromise that Roberts can work out with another one of the conservatives. But that's what this is all hinging on.
Wow.
Unfortunately.
What do you think, Don?
I think one really striking thing, so you asked about sort of the problems in their analysis, and so one major philosophic one, because they do talk about in the abortion cases the issue of rights, but rights are presented always as a balancing act. So we have to balance the rights of the mother, the rights of the unborn. It's not usually put as the rights, but the interests of the government and kind of balancing those. But that is all wrong. Like from the objectivist perspective on things, rights are precisely what allow us to get rid of these kinds of conflicts so that we can live in a society. And so if you see a conflict of rights, you know that you're thinking about it all in the wrong way. And that is, I think, doubles down on this point that rights can't apply to the unborn because there's an inherent conflict there, that there's no way to resolve a conflict between a woman who wants to control her body, control her fate in life, and decide what to do with her body, and somebody telling her, no, you have to carry a pregnancy to term. And so we're only dealing with rights once we're dealing with distinct individuals. And so I think the what we've really seen in the legal arguments, it's hard to be sympathetic to either side because the legal reasoning seems so bad. I mean, I haven't read the full opinion in the original Roe case, but I think we touched on it. It was founded in a right, but the right was the right to privacy, which is really bizarre when you think about, well, like if I, kill somebody in my cellar and the police come like knocking, like are they destroying my right to privacy? The right to privacy presupposes that you have a right to be doing what you're engaged in doing. And so the fundamental question is this an individual human being with rights that need to be protected? And so I'm concerned about I don't have any optimism about the legal reasoning that's going into it. And neither did Ayn Rand. When she endorsed Roe, she explicitly said that it's kind of dubious legal reasoning, but we should cheer the outcome of it. But she recognized that always, makes it precarious. If we're not explicitly in the principle, if we don't get the explicit principle right, there's always this ability to undermine it. And so I think we're going to see some undermining. And the question is, how bad is it going to be?
One of the most shocking moments for me in law school, studying constitutional rights, my law school professor, it's almost like day one in constitutional law. Who here thinks that individual rights in the Bill of Rights are absolutes? I was the one person in class who raised my hand. And, the truth is that if we went by the original language and intent, interestingly, of the things like the 14th Amendment, that would be more the perspective. These are fundamental rights. Congress shall make no law, ... is how the Bill of Rights begins. And that sounds pretty absolute to me. And they used big, broad conceptual language that incorporated these things. The 14th Amendment was meant to include, get this, the authors, the drafters of the 14th Amendment back, 150 years ago, were saying that your fundamental rights include the right to get a job, voluntarily, of course, to employ people, of course, to buy and sell, to own property, to sue and be sued in court, that you're to have children, get married. Your fundamental rights included every aspect of your life, and they meant to include a protection of all of our liberties in a broad, broad way. And it's the Supreme Court that has put in this balancing act. And day one, my constitutional law professor said exactly what Don did. There are no absolutes. It's a balancing test. We have to balance these people's interests versus these people's interests. That is fundamentally corrupt and fundamentally opposed to actually the ideological structure of our original Bill of Rights and the 14th Amendment that was passed after the Civil War. That is utterly corrupt way of looking at it. Agreed. And so because of the backdoor way in which the Supreme Court has put this in, it is an incredibly strained defense of it. I think that in the Constitution, and here I would point to legal scholars such as the late Bernard Segan or Professor Randy Barnett's most recent book on the 14th Amendment, or the philosophical work of Professor Tara Smith. I think there are ways in which we can understand the United States Constitution protects individual liberty as such until and unless there's someone else's rights involved. And I think there are better philosophical approaches the Supreme Court could take with existing constitutional language that could preserve a fundamental right to abortion in a woman as an expression of her fundamental right to liberty.
Do you think the only real solve to this problem is a constitutional amendment? And would that be possible given the philosophical climate today?
I would be terrified at a constitutional amendment today, given the political situation today, the conservatives versus the leftists, neither of them have anything remotely resembling the original concept of rights as embodied in our Constitution. So I do not think that this is a time for a constitutional convention. I'm not even sure I'd trust any language that would come out of Congress or the states on such a amendment. As I say, I think the correct course is philosophical education that will lead to proper legal theory and legal education so that the existing Constitution can be found to protect the broadest liberty interest of individuals. And I think it can be done.
Yeah, I mean, I think so. One thing that makes this issue tricky is that so I deal a lot with communication, and unfortunately, it's very easy for the anti-abortionists to take the moral high ground in this issue. And one of the reasons that it's easy is that they're able to frame it as that we're on the side of life and you're kind of on, well, I'm going to murder life because it's inconvenient for me. And part of what goes into it is a trivialization of happiness. So if you think, what is the right to abortion safeguarding? People actually feel much more comfortable when they're able to defend it on like the life of the mother and the health danger to her. And certainly there's no question that anti-abortion laws make the world more dangerous for women. But the fact that their happiness, and specifically their sexual happiness, is not treated as a crucial value that has to be protected, it really, I think, reveals the hollowness and emptiness of the so-called reverence for life of the anti-abortionists. Because life does not mean, so remember, I mean, the religious conservatives are the same people who thought, keeping Terry Schiavo's brain dead body essentially alive, quote, alive, hooked up to machines, was some kind of moral endeavor. But no, life is life. It's the ability to think, to live, to choose, including and to seek out joy. And that's really what's being done, is in the name of a non-life, that is a thing that might be alive in a biological sense of cells that are functioning in a certain way. But in terms of a human life, where you're an individual creature acting in the world, they're wiping out any concern with your ability to pursue values and pursue joy and pursue pleasure in the name of something that's not yet living in the human sense. And that, I think, is the real travesty. And so that's sort of, I think, when you're thinking about, well, how do we actually, how would we persuade people to have a better view on this that then would hopefully get protected by better laws? It's really tapping into this issue of they're not on the side of life if life means something beyond a kind of biological state of cellular activity, and if it really means the ability to flourish.
They are thorough religious intrinsicists on the concept of life. If it's a single-celled organism, it's a human being with all the full-fledged rights. As you say, no matter how brain dead at the other end the vegetable is, there's no other consideration. That's life. It's where we can't play God, of course. They're willing to play God in their own way, of course. But of course, they'll tell you can't play God. So it's a thoroughly intrinsicist view of life that has to be protected at all costs, no matter what. They don't realize the cloud they're putting over someone's head. I mean, just think about, the range of take Ayn Rand. Take Ayn Rand. Could she have written Atlas Shrugged, an introduction to objectivist epistemology, had she chosen to be a mother, for example? No, she made a self-conscious decision that she was going to devote herself to her art and her philosophy, and I, for one, am totally grateful. She had thousands of children of the mind, not of her body. And I think that'll, in the long run, have greater impact on the well-being of the human species than her reproducing her genes, although she must have had some remarkably smart genes. But there are thousands more examples. I mean,
even, but jumping off of what Don said too, so many of these folks who are anti-abortion blow off the fact that there could be long-term physical issues that a woman has from carrying a child, even if she carries it to term and then gives it up for adoption. The 9 months that she's carrying the child are not even considered. The time afterwards for physical recuperation.
My wife did not want to have a child because she didn't want to go through what it does to her body. Start there. She wanted a career, of course, and so she had other good reasons. But yeah, look at what it's doing to my body. No way, it's my body. Someone's going
Right.
to force me to carry a pregnancy to term and then put me into this terrible situation where I either put the child up for adoption, gosh knows where the child is going then. So you've got this cloud over your head, which you've created, or now have to devote the next, 20 years of my life to this child. And it's, of course, a lifetime concern. So, yeah, they have no concern what they're doing. And that's why I regard this issue as sort of like the military draft. What you're doing is you're affecting a whole person. Well, in the draft, you could be killing them, but no matter what, you're affecting a whole person's life. In effect, you're enslaving the person.
Right.
I might make a 13th Amendment, anti-slavery argument against both the draft and the abortion laws. You're saying her life is not her own.
Indeed. So, I mean, I've had debates with guys like Zuby Music on this. He's the exact opposite of us. Or I was holding the individuation argument as the standard. He didn't think he thought a woman was basically a vessel for the pregnancy from the moment of conception. Obviously, it's informed by a religious intrinsicist point of view. Don, what's the solution to this? I mean, we know the Supreme Court's going to flounder on this issue, but how can we as objectivists change the culture?
I mean, I tried to indicate part of it is that you want, so in every debate, it's what are the alternatives? And so if the alternatives are something like life versus choice, that's a really crappy kind of alternative from somebody who values the rights of women and their ability to control their bodies and control their sexual life. And so I think I don't have the kind of sexiest framing for it or the best like terminology for it yet, but I really think it is. I mean, what Jim was just touching on, like the idea of slavery and so on. You want to get it to that level where it's clear cut that this is not that the good is on the side of a woman's right to control what happens to her body, and that what's being enforced by the anti-abortionists is really corrupt. And it's switching that framing that I think is the real crux and key to the issue. But it's hard to do because you can't just have 5 sentences to explain it. You have to be able to encapsulate it in both a powerful but also persuasive way. So I think it's working to figure out exactly how to do that. But at the end of the day, no framing is going to completely overcome the fact that the culture is deeply religious in many parts of the country. And part of the religion is not valuing human life and happiness. And so long as you have that, it becomes tricky.
So I have some super chats here that I think we should get to. One from Enric Teller. I hope I'm pronouncing that right, for $4.99. Thank you, Enric. The point of viability should be considered without technological support, like an incubator. What do you guys think of that?
So what he's suggesting is that we think of viability in the old-fashioned terms, not in terms of the latest technology, because technology has really dramatically pushed back viability. It used to be that it's at 7 or 8 months they would, you put them in an incubator and maybe they'll survive. Now it's like 6 months, maybe 5 months at some point, where they can save the fetus. Should that be the test, their ability to save the fetus? No, that obviously should not be the test, but I don't think viability is the legal test either. Viability is simply the ability, if we were to take steps to remove the baby in a certain way and make sure it's incubators and whatnot, even if it were 8 months and the baby comes out, the baby might come out okay, that's still not the legal test for me. That's still not an objective legal test at all. No. It's
Okay,
not
so
a balancing act, like Don says, between the fetus and the woman until the fetus becomes an independent being, in my mind.
right. You have anything to add to that, Don?
No, it's just, I mean, I think that's right. That is the question that you have to answer fundamentally is in terms of rights. And at that point, viability is irrelevant, in my view, to defining rights. It might be relevant to assessing morality. I still don't think it probably is. I don't think that's the most relevant sort of thing to be taking into account. But the only reason to raise viability as an issue is if we're thinking more at the tactical level, or like what should we hope for from the Supreme Court? Because certainly it's better if they're saying that the right is sacrosanct before viability. That's better. than if they say that there is no right at all that the court is protecting. And if they're going to put it in terms of viability, it's better that they do it without technological support than with. But I actually think some of the discussion that took place in the court was a little bit better. So I think the way that I forget which justice it was, but there was an issue of, are we really concerned about viability, or are we concerned with protecting the time required for a woman to make an informed decision? And I think that's actually right. That if let's say somebody doesn't agree with me that it's, separation of the biological entities, I think that at minimum, the bare minimum, if you're at all humane and you even want a seat at the table, should be a woman needs to have the time to realize she got pregnant, to look through her options, to make arrangements. And that kind of is the more objective and reasonable approach, rather than something inherent with, the unborn.
It was Gorsuch who was questioning whether viability is a sensible rule and kicks in or not. And once we do that, then haven't we made it subject to whatever technology can do? And a really good line of questioning. And that's what makes the Texas law so problematic. It makes the fetal heartbeat the issue, and that can happen at 5-6 weeks. Wow. And so a woman might not even know she's pregnant, and it becomes illegal for her to terminate the pregnancy after only 1 month. She may not even know she's pregnant. There's reasons you can miss a period or have a light period and not be pregnant. That is absolutely. And how on earth do we impose the obligations of a parent on a woman if it's not her voluntary choice? I mean, the whole point is that it's an obligation of the parent once they have discharged their part of the reproductive responsibility. And in a woman's case, that means carrying the baby to term.
So Mary Aline has another super chat here for $10. Thank you, Mary Aline. Is there anyone on the Supreme Court who could be expected to look at abortion in light of individual rights, or understand that the unborn can't have rights? Is Clarence Thomas even far from this issue?
No, the answer there is simply no. There is no justice of the current justice of the United States Supreme Court that I'm confident will rule correctly on the issue of a woman's right to her own life as a basic individual right that conditions this whole issue. No. Unfortunately, Gorsuch may be the closest to something like that, but even Clarence Thomas and other justices who are right, at least on certain issues, are terribly wrong when it comes to the expansive nature of the rights that the framers put into the Constitution. These conservatives are looking for every excuse they can to restrict individual liberty, when in fact the framers had a very big, bold, broad concept of individual liberty.
Allison Beard has, thank you, Allison, $5. If we need a constitutional amendment so women can have abortions without problems, then what does that say about society? I think that's true. Shazbot has one for $49.99. Thank you, Shazbot. The Pixar movie Soul depicts human souls as residing in an otherworldly bureaucracy until they are assigned to and implanted in human infants. I was appalled. Is this idea shared by religion, and is it an influence in the anti-abortion movement? Very good question, Shazbot.
Well, I definitely think so. Wouldn't say exactly that specifically, but certainly, as we've touched on the religious idea that what makes a human being is this kind of mystical implantation of a soul. And one way that this comes up subtly, even by secular thinkers who are interested in kind of classical liberal ideas about rights, is this idea that rights are just something that we kind of have. They're like a feature or characteristic of human beings and kind of implanted in us. Whereas the objectivist view is that rights are moral principles, and that they're based on certain facts about human beings. And so we can reason about them. We don't have to just intuitively gaze, when does the soul get implanted? When do rights get implanted, or something like that? No, it's that rights arise in the context of individuals living in a social context and saying, how can they live together and retain their sovereignty and their ability to pursue their happiness independently? And so, insofar as we think of rights as something people have rather than as moral principles, we're kind of pushed in this direction of the same kind of thinking that goes into, when does the soul get implanted? It's that same kind of unanswerable question that then treats rights and a soul as something mystical and really can distort people's thinking, even if they're not explicitly religious on the issue.
Kirk Wilcox for $2 says, "Thank you for amazing content." God, I wish the justices could hear what you, James, and Don, Don, are saying, because I think it's life-changing if they could just hear it.
I agree. Amen.
So, guys, do you have anything to add before we conclude? Because I have some announcements to make here. If unless there's other things to add, I think we're at the end of the super chats.
Well, I think that I think we covered the issue with Don's help morally and with my help legally pretty well here. It's a fundamental right, and we are on the verge of the Supreme Court at least paring it back or eliminating it, and that is a very real possibility. We probably won't get the decision till next year, probably June sometime, which could alter. The Republicans are setting themselves up for a pretty good midterm. That could alter the entire dynamics for them. That's a narrow political issue, I know, but what we're looking at more fundamentally is a basic right that women have that could be curtailed or completely eliminated by the middle of next year. Serious business.
That's frightening. Don, do you want to add anything in conclusion?
Nope, that I think captures my view as well.
So, guys, there's going to be no no clubhouse today. We all have busy schedules right after this, so we won't be able to do a clubhouse. So we'll miss you there. And this is such a stimulating conversation. I know you guys are going to want to continue it afterwards. 9 p.m. UK time, HBTV with Harry Binswanger, Free Will, A New Theory of Self-Control. 10 p.m. UK time, Method in Madness with Ibis, Larry, and Dr. Ankar Gate. American Slavery's View of Human Nature. Okay. And I forgot to mention Jonathan Honig gave us $9.99 American dollars. Well, thanks so much, guys, for such a stimulating chat, for those insights. I think they were awesome. I wish they could be magnified even more so millions upon millions of people can hear them. Nobody says it better than you guys. And we'll catch you next time. Thanks for visiting us on the Daily Objective, and we'll see you again. Thank you.
Thank you.